So our normal menopause Thursday morning talk. I'm trying to do something a little bit different today. Maybe I'll wait another couple minutes and then we'll get started. It is a holiday weekend. Hopefully some folks are actually getting the holiday and got plans and spend some time with family and friends and all that good stuff. So, alrighty. So I'm going to get started. I thought what I'd do today, because I'm seeing it more and more in my practice, is for the women that I take care of that are kind of in this menopausal window, late menopause, they're struggling with weight. We know it happens, and they're in this sort of bucket of, maybe they're doing what they've been doing, relying on the way they've been managing their health in the past, and they just can't seem to lose weight. And they've tried everything, they're frustrated, they're not getting a lot of help. So that's, I would say, a bulk of the women that I take care of that are in this age category, it is definitely top of mind, right? So it keeps coming up in my practice. So I thought what I'd do today is just go through a couple cases and walk you through how I think about this, walk you through what I recommend, the things I look at, and how I support my patients as a way for you to, if you're in this bucket and in this group, as a way for you to start to think about, okay, if I'm in this category and if I have this same struggle, how would I look at that, right? How do I start to think about maybe how to tweak things a little bit to kind of support long-term health? So I thought I'd do more of a case study kind of thing. We do this a lot in medicine. We sort of present cases and we learn from the case. We talk about how did we manage them, what did we do, so that we can apply that going forward. So I'm going to try that, see how it goes. Ask questions along the way, that kind of thing. So I'm going to read some of the history. So I may kind of look away from the screen as I'm kind of reading things. But again, all the names are different, so I'm not putting out any PHI, but it's just in general, right? If somebody comes to me and this is kind of their history, what do I do with that? And how do I tease out, what may or may not be going on? And then how do I support them? Again, the overall topic is menopause and weight loss, or inability to lose weight, because as we know, things start to shift, right? We tend to start holding on to weight, our muscle mass decreases, our fat deposition increases, maybe our sleep's affected. So how do all these things start to play into each other, and how can, if you're in the right place with the right doc, how you can get the kind of care that you deserve. So the first one is, we'll call her Rachel. She's 57 years old. So comes to me with, can't lose weight, not happy with where she is with her health, hasn't been getting great care, or, just not feeling like she's being heard, wondering about, what may or may not be happening. Is this menopause? How does she start to lose weight? So for most of my patients, when I come in, if I don't have a good set of labs, I certainly talk about that. I get a really detailed lifestyle history. What does that mean? So for me, it is super important to understand, how are people just living their life, right? Do you sleep? If so, how much sleep are you getting? Are you getting quality sleep? So what does that mean? Are you rested during the day? Are you doing the afternoon slump and reaching for whatever snacks are around you? Are you, falling asleep, if you're in a meeting? Are you just straight out of gas in the middle of your day? Do you find that you need pick-me-ups, whether that's coffee, energy drinks, food? How are you feeling generally during the day? That gives me a sense of, are you getting good quality sleep? So I ask those sorts of questions. I ask, how are you feeding yourself? What are your breakfast, lunch, and dinner choices? Are you snacking in between? If so, what are you eating? And it's just a broad brush. What's your 24-hour recall? Because from there, I can get some clues, right? As to, are we choosing foods that are nutrient dense? Or are we choosing foods that are calorie rich? Or are we choosing foods that may be driving some insulin resistance? So the nutrition sort of survey is super, super important for me. And then the other thing is, Are you moving regularly? And if so, what is your movement of choice? Are you a runner? Are you walking? Are you doing lots of cardio or little cardio? Are you lifting or not lifting? Are you doing any kind of strength training, lifting, so that sort of thing? What are we doing? How often are we doing it? And what does that look like? I'll ask questions along those lines. And then I get a good family history, right? What are we predisposed to potentially? What are some of our genetics? Knowing that we can still modify that expression of the gene, but what are we coming with, right? Cancer history, any sort of diabetes, autoimmune disease, those sorts of things. I had a patient yesterday and we spent a fair amount of time on her bowel movements. And she's like, I've never had a doc ask me about my bowel movements, so I've never thought to talk about it. But there were some really good clues in that conversation about her bowel movements. And I could tell a lot about what could be some underlying cause of some of the things that she's struggling with, really just talking about her bowel movement. So it was really fascinating. She's like, I've never, ever. But those are things I ask, right? Do you go to the bathroom? If so, how often? Is it soft? Is it hard? Are you working at it? These are important details. They seem sort of nonsense, right? Why would my doc care? That's hugely important to me. So this is the kind of detailed lifestyle history I typically get with all of my patients. So if we go back to Rachel, 57-year-old, we'll call her Rachel. Again, lifestyle history, she's mostly vegetarian, but as I tease out her history, she's eating mostly refined carbohydrates. She's eating a lot of dairy, but she's not getting any really meat protein. She's mostly vegetarian. She'll do some fish every now and again. Does okay on fruit, so a couple servings of fruit a day. She walks regularly, but doesn't do any strength training at all. Mostly walking with her friends, once or twice a week. She gets into maybe a yoga once or twice a week. She has a couple glasses of wine over the course of the week, mostly with dinner. Her sleep is fair. She doesn't feel entirely well rested, but also, thinks she's getting pretty good sleep. Again, when we tease it out, she sort of has this little bit of an afternoon slump. So that gives me some clue that maybe her sleep isn't as restorative as it could be. And when I do some baseline labs on her, she has a low high sensitivity CRP, and I'll explain why that's important. Her labs tell me she's got some insulin resistance. I'll explain why that's important. And then she's got an optimal lipid panel. And if you've heard me, I talk about normal versus optimal, right? So normal is when you look at the lab, are you in the green? Optimal is, are you in a place where you are really high functioning when it comes to that particular data set? And I have a low concern that if we kept our habits where they were, that you would progress to disease, right? So I really like people to be optimal. So her lipid panel is optimal. So let me kind of tease some of this out for you. Let's look at the lab. So what does low high sensitivity CRP mean? Or what is high sensitivity CRP? When I look at people from a risk standpoint, I say, what is your inflammatory burden in your body? Because we know that inflammation breeds disease. So high sensitivity CRP gives me a clue as to what is the inflammatory burden in somebody's body. So I always get that on someone. So for her, she has low high sensitivity CRP. So that's fantastic. So that's not one potential sort of root cause. There are three things I look at. So one is the inflammatory burden. The other is your insulin resistance, right? Or insulin sensitivity, because we know that is one of the three, in my mind, root cause to disease. So for her, she has insulin resistance. So that tells me that insulin resistance means that we're going to have an inability to sort of get rid of glucose. That high riding glucose will eventually lead to more inflammation. It certainly is going to prevent or slow down some weight loss. And then it eventually will affect what's called your metabolic function. How well are your cells using the energy that you give it? So looking at her triglyceride to HDL ratio tells me what her metabolic health is. And at this point, her metabolic health is good, but we know that insulin resistance is going to start to complicate those other two parameters that I talked about. Inflammatory marker and metabolic function. Insulin resistance is sitting here in the middle. So she's got some insulin resistance. Her lipid panel is optimal right now, and she has a low high sensitivity CRP. So those are kind of the internal looks that I have, right? Then I say, okay, she's walking regularly. That's great. Walking is fantastic. It is great for cardiovascular health. It is not fantastic for our metabolism as we get into these years, right? So for her, if she's looking to lose weight, we have to increase our metabolism, right? We know that's going to take a nosedive during menopause. So looking for ways to up the burn, right? That metabolic rate in our body is huge. And walking we're going to need to add something to the mix to increase our metabolic rate. So walking, although very, very good for us, that's not going to increase our metabolic rate. So really what she needs to do is to integrate some lifting and potentially some faster pace things for shorter duration of time. Those two things have been shown to do a much better job of increasing our metabolic rate during in and around menopause. So for her, absolutely keep walking. Walking with a friend has major, major benefit. There's actually research that's been done that it's really good for our brain. So continue to do that. What I encouraged her to do is find some other times during her day, if we could get to 2-3 days a week of doing some lifting, would be hugely beneficial. So for her exercise is one place that we could modify in order to help sort of adjust her weight and improve her weight during menopause. So including some lifting in there and short interval, but more rapid things. And again, making sure that you have a doc. In her case, she doesn't have any risk factors that would say, ooh, she can't do kind of a little bit more like effort stuff, right? Short interval, high intensity type of exercise. So I have no sort of reservations in her doing that because I'm her doc. I know that, right? She doesn't have cardiovascular risk factors. Her lipid profile is fantastic. I see her functionally. I know she's capable. So supporting her in doing more short interval, high intensity, as well as lifting is going to sort of crank things up a little bit and help her metabolism. Then we say, okay, she's drinking some alcohol. Alcohol is a complicated topic because we all drink for different reasons, right? Some of us it's to unwind at the end of the day. Some of us we just enjoy the taste. Some of it's a social anxiety thing, right? So we use alcohol to be able to carry on the conversations, go through the work meetings, right? All of the things. Alcohol, unfortunately, aside from it being a huge cancer risk, is again going to worsen our sort of menopausal symptoms, right? It can worsen our hot flush and it can worsen our night sweats. It certainly can change our sleep. It increases our risk of cardiovascular disease. And then again, it's going to make it challenging to lose weight. Again, the empty calories, the sugars that may be in it. So supporting people in reducing their alcohol consumption is 1000% my goal and my hope for most of my patients. That is not to say you can never, ever have a drink. It's just the weekly consumption that becomes challenging, not to mention what it does to your brain health. So talking through her, right, and supporting her through how do we bring down that alcohol consumption, assuming our long-term goal, right? It's all about, I talk a lot about what's your health vision. What do you want for the rest of your life? How do you want those retirement years to look? What are we trying to accomplish? And how do I support people with that? So adjusting that alcohol consumption. And then her nutrition. She's mostly vegetarian. And most people say, oh, okay, vegetarian's great, right? Sure, that should be awesome. Why should she have to change that? And that's a lot of what I hear. I eat healthy. I exercise. Why am I not losing weight? Well, so when we really dig into her nutrition, she's mostly vegetarian. Red meat we know is super pro-inflammatory, and we can see, right? Her high sensitivity CRP is low. She does not have a huge inflammatory burden in her body, and that's likely because she's not consuming a lot of red meat. But as a vegetarian, if we're not getting good quality carbohydrates, then what we're doing is we're feeding this insulin system, right? So for her, although vegetarian, she's eating more refined carbohydrates. So what does that mean? So carbs, they're not bad. It's the quality of the carbohydrate that becomes important. So our brain needs carbohydrates. Carbohydrates, depending on the quality of them, they will get converted to glucose more rapidly. So refined carbohydrates, we're talking the white rice, the breads, the things that are the fiber has been stripped off the carbohydrate. They've been refined and processed. When we consume that kind of carbohydrate, it gets converted to glucose extremely quickly. Insulin has to be secreted to move that glucose out of our bloodstream because it can be harmful. And then we take a quick nosedive, right? So the insulin gets pulled away. The glucose gets pulled away. We do a quick nosedive and we're like, oh my God, I need something else to eat. And then we're reaching for something else. Bring the sugar up. Bunch of insulin gets secreted and we do the nosedive. And we're on this roller coaster all day long. And then we have, over time, our insulin gets higher and higher and higher. And in her, she has insulin resistance, right? She's got high fasting insulin. Her fasting glucose may be quote unquote normal. It's less than 100, but underneath her insulin level is increasing because it's having to work to move that sugar out of the bloodstream. So that tells me that her choices of refined carbohydrates and some dairy is driving that insulin resistance. And over time, that is going to change her metabolic function, which is okay now, but over time it would. So what do? I love that she's not eating a lot of red meat because we know that is pro-inflammatory, but we need to include more complex carbohydrates. Carbohydrates that are not going to drive that push of insulin so quickly. Is going to give us a more even glucose throughout the day. We're not going to be doing the nosedive in the afternoon. We're not going to be reaching for the snacks. Good brain food. We're not going to have as much brain fog. We're going to have the energy to do what we need. So complex carbohydrates, fiber essentially, right? So beans, legumes, certain fruits, certain veggies. But we got to work in those complex carbohydrates and save the refined carbohydrates or minimize those entirely. The other big thing we talk about is, if we think about how we feed ourselves, if we start our morning with things that are refined carbs or high in sugar, so first thing in the morning, that's what we're feeding ourselves. We've got, again, that ton of insulin that gets secreted. We do a nosedive, and then all day long, we're chasing it all day long. So if anything that was to change your breakfast, make sure your breakfast does not have sugary things and highly processed carbohydrates. Eat a savory breakfast. Eat things that give you good quality protein. If you're going to choose a carb, make sure it's a complex carb and some healthy fat. Start your breakfast with something that's going to give you a neutral glucose rise. It's not going to do the big drive. Complex carbohydrates, protein and fat do very little insulin bump. What's in your coffee, right? Are you doing a ton of milk and sugar? Are you, like if you drink coffee, if you drink tea, what are we putting in our tea? Honey is a sweetener. Maple syrup is a sweetener. It's not just the table sugar. The yogurt, does it have a ton of sugar in it? Look at what you're eating in the morning. The boxed cereals, loaded with sugar. Even oatmeal sometimes, right? If it's refined, so I did this with somebody the other day. If you look at your fiber to carbohydrate ratio on the back of any packages that you buy, it should be no more than 5-1, right? So if you have 5 grams of fiber, your total carbohydrates should not be more than 25, because then you know that is a more complex carbohydrate. If you've got 4 grams of fiber or 5 grams of fiber and you've got 40 grams of carbohydrates in that thing, that is more refined. It is going to jack up your glucose. So flip the things around. If it's packaged, right? If you're not choosing whole food, then flip it around and see what's your fiber to carbohydrate ratio. And then we want to choose things that are complex carbs. So breakfast in the morning can be, look at like Dave's Killer Bread, and if you're just going to do wheat, please look at the back, because a lot of times we think, right, it's on the package. It's got lots of fiber and it's called, healthy and whole grain, right? And if you look in the back, it really isn't. So flip it around, see what you got, put some avocado on it, put some hummus on it, right? Put, Have a little bean salad in the morning with a little bit of guacamole. I used to eat wasa crackers. Those are fairly decent on the side of being complex carb with some avocado or some hummus or something like that. I happen to be vegetarian. Oatmeal with chia seed. I love the chia seed. Look at the back of the oatmeal package. Look at the back and see what's the fiber to carbohydrate ratio. That's my only thing with that. You can add some cinnamon to that. That'll cut that glucose spike as well. That's a little bit of a cheater. If it is a bit more refined carbs, add a little bit of cinnamon and that'll cut down the sugar spike. So anything that's packaged, look at it and see what that fiber to carbohydrate ratio is. Again, you want no more than 5-1. So make sure that you have, so if your fiber is 5, you don't want your carbohydrate to be more than 25 in that whatever that package is that you're eating. So start your breakfast without added sugars and without refined carbohydrates so that you're not doing that chase every single morning. Alrighty. So that was Rachel, right? One little case study, how I kind of teased out her recommendations. Any questions at all with Rachel? And again, my format is like, don't be shy. Ask me anything. This is our time to kind of talk together. So for those that are joining, I'm doing things a little bit different today. I'm doing more of like a case study format. We do that a lot in medicine, right? You present a case and we talk through, ideas. Did we treat them right? What's the presentation? That kind of thing. So I'm seeing a lot in my practice, women struggling with weight loss. This happens during our perimenopause and menopausal years, right? We are either doing everything we did before and it's just not cutting it, or we're noticing we're gaining weight and we're like, what the H is happening? We're gaining weight around our midsection. So what do we do? So I was explaining how I get a real detailed history. What's your lifestyle? I look at your labs and then we kind of tease things out together. So I'm sort of walking people through how I do that. So the next one, 52-year-old, call her Sarah. So her history is limited exercise. She does a lot of walking for work, but no like dedicated, I'm going to do this activity. Mostly meat protein when we do her nutrition recall. And again, I don't get into, okay, how many calories are you eating and how many grams of this? I just tell people broad strokes. How do you feed yourself? What do you have for breakfast? What do you have for lunch? What do you have for dinner? What are your snacks in between? Broad strokes. And just if I listen, I love my job. I really do love my job because I get to listen, right? I let people just tell me and I listen to how you feed yourself. What are your choices? And then I get to play a little bit of a detective and then we get to talk together. That's really my day. It's actually pretty cool. So I listen, right? And when I listen broad strokes, it's mostly meat protein. There's not a lot of fiber in her nutrition because she's telling me, I don't hear a lot of beans. I don't hear a lot of legumes when she's breaking down her dietary recall. She's eating about 3 servings of fruit a day. She's eating about 3 to 4 servings of fruit a day. And all of her protein choices are meat protein, right? Whether that's red meat or chicken or whatever the case may be, right? Maybe some fish in there. Then she's not getting great sleep, right? She talks about she's restless, having the typical insomnia that comes with perimenopause, and feels tired during the day, kind of draggy in the afternoon. So I know she's not getting great sleep. So we have to talk about how we're going to manage that. She's noticing that her partner is telling her she's snoring more. So definitely getting some pretty restless sleep, not doing any lifting and not drinking any alcohol. All right. So when I kind of go through her scenario, so the things that pique my interest, I'll start with motion. So pretty limited amount of motion. And I will say, though, there's this misnomer with weight loss that it's just like simple math. It's calories in, calories out. And that is not true. And I hope, if nothing else, going through this with each other, that our health and our weight being one component of that, it is a complicated, multifactorial thing, right? It's not just purely one thing that defines our health. There are lots of levers that we can pull, and that's the same thing with our weight. There are lots of things that can that we can adjust to get us to the optimal weight. So it's not just a simple eat less, move more. There's lots of layers. So, however, having said that, motion is important, right? We got to move. We have to be perpetually in motion. And I think I talked on one of these things about always staying comfortably uncomfortable, right? We want to challenge the system. We are blessed to have the ability to move. We are blessed to have health, right? And I hope that people take advantage of that. Like, look at motion as a gift, not as a have to. The ability to get out and move and be active and enjoy time with family is a gift. It's a blessing. And I hope that people take that as such, right? Enjoy, find the thing you love to do and do that. Don't feel like, oh, I gotta go exercise. Like, whatever it is you love, right? Find that and make it challenging. So for her, she's getting very limited exercise. She walks for work, which is great, but not really getting out and challenging the system, right? So that's certainly an opportunity. So for her, she doesn't want to do the gym, right? She's not a gym person, doesn't want to go lift weight and take classes. So we explored the idea of, okay, do you love to walk? Yes, I love to walk. She's got girlfriends that she can walk with. Fantastic. How do we squeeze that into your day? Where do you think you can work in 3-4 days a week to start to walk regularly? And then we said, okay, once you start doing that, how do you make that a little bit more challenging? So we explored, what are the routes around the house? What are the routes near work that you could do? Are there hills on those routes? Can we reverse the routes, right? Can we go to, walk on a trail on the weekend, those sorts of things. A little bit different terrain. It's going to challenge the system a little bit more. And then we said, okay, if that becomes easy and when that becomes easy, change your pace, right? So if you're walking at a leisurely pace, again, you want it to be challenging but yet comfortable. Carry on a conversation but not sing. And when you can do that a little bit easier, now pick up the pace a little bit more, right? Walk a little faster. Look into getting a weighted vest. Add 10% of your body weight onto you as you walk. That'll start to challenge the system. Then you can go all the way to something called rucking, where it's almost like a backpack filled with more weight. And again, challenging the system. Remain comfortably uncomfortable. And that's purely with walking. It's amazing what happens when people learn how powerful they are and how much strength they have. And then over time, we can start to explore some other things like lifting, carrying some hand weights with you, those sorts of things. Doing overhead presses while you walk. There's so many ways that we can start really, really simple and get people some pretty major benefit, and then we can build into some other things. So we spent a lot of time talking about exercise and how we start to challenge the system in and around there, right? Then we got into her nutrition. So mostly meat protein and low fiber. So which means if it's low fiber, but she's definitely doing carbohydrates, so we know it's going to be kind of that highly processed, refined carbohydrate. So I already know that that's going to be driving some insulin, likely. The purely meat protein is likely going to drive some inflammatory markers up, and that's just my history. She's got poor sleep, so likely means her inflammatory burden is going to be a little high. That's also going to feed some insulin resistance if we're not sleeping well. So just listening, right? Just purely history at this point. So sure enough, we get some labs back, right? So labs show that she's got fatty liver disease, which is non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. She's got insulin resistance. She's already pre-diabetic. Her high sensitivity CRP is elevated, and her vitamin D was also really low. And we already talked about how she's got poor quality sleep. So what do? Right? We spent time talking about her exercise, right? And then again, we spend time talking about nutrition because it's important. What do we do with your nutrition? Can we work in some meat protein? Are you willing to explore taking out some of that super inflammatory red meat and adding in some high quality plant protein? Where can we work that in? Does she need referral to a dietitian to get into the weeds? Because I can give you some broad strokes, but I can't get into like macros and grams and all of that, right? I can give you some general ideas, but do we need a dietitian to really, really help us get into the weeds? And then again, those refined carbohydrates are going to jack up your sugar. What are you eating for breakfast? Make your breakfast count. Make that the beginning of just like a nice, even glucose so you're not on that roller coaster all day long. So how do we tweak your breakfast? Working in some fiber, complex carbohydrates. We talked about her sleep, right? Does she need to be screened for sleep apnea? We know we're going to get some insomnia. We know we're going to get, the night sweats and all of that. That's going to mess up our sleep. But should she be screened for sleep apnea, which we did, right? So starting to go down that road of sleep apnea because it looks different in women. It'll affect our mood, not always the snoring, right? In her case, she was starting to do that, but it affects our mood. It for sure is going to make weight loss difficult. It changes our brain health. It drives up our cortisol level, which drives up our inflammatory markers. So sleep is profound. It is not just the thing we do at the end of the day when everything is done. And I am a victim of it. Sleep is a constant challenge for me. It is something I'm always working on. So getting really good quality sleep. So sleep apnea in her case. And so the fatty liver, nutrition will do that, modifying that nutrition. Getting more exercise will help that fatty liver, non-alcoholic fatty liver. So you can get a fatty liver, meaning the liver literally gets replaced with fat. Because of alcohol, you can also get it from metabolic dysfunction, right? Essentially, when you eat fat, protein, carbs, your liver is responsible to break down that stuff, and it produces waste in the meantime. And if there's too much coming in, right, if we're overfed and the liver can't process, break it down into triglycerides and wrap it in a lipoprotein, send it off, then it starts to store fat in itself, and that becomes non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. It is reversible. It's preventable, first of all, and reversible. So what are our nutrition choices? Are we eating high-fat foods, highly processed foods? Where's the fiber, right? Those sorts of things. So we walk through that as a way to reverse that fatty liver. Insulin resistance, she was already pre-diabetic. Again, those refined carbohydrates are just it's like gasoline. It's just gonna feed that. So we've got to start working in those complex carbs to try to reverse some of that insulin resistance and that pre-diabetes, which it's reversible. Type 2 diabetes is reversible, preventable, and reversible. So modifying that, cutting back on the saturated fats, which usually comes in the red meats, it comes in the dairy products, right? Super high in saturated fats. The oils are also high in saturated fat, so being mindful of that. We supplemented her vitamin D. All my patients get access to FullScript, my FullScript account. They get 35% off. I pass on all the discount to my patients. So we get her a high quality vitamin D supplement, D with K2, because again, vitamin D, bone health, brain health, right? All the things that we need. So we get her vitamin D supplement, and then we do the sleep study, right? And then we continue to work together. So that was Sarah. All right, so the next one, 53-year-old, we'll call her Pam. So again, listening to her history, she does a ton of cardio, right? She's like doing Zumba and she's doing some dance and like lots of cardio. Like that's her jam, and it's worked well for her, right? She's always done lots of cardio, and it's always helped her to stay, keep her weight down. So she's like, this is what I should be doing. So lots of cardio. She's not doing any lifting. She's mostly vegetarian, but she doesn't eat very much, right? She does time-restricted eating and only feeds for a very small window because, again, that's how she's kept her weight down, right? All these years, time-restricted eating has worked for her. Time-restricted eating has worked for her, and she's done a ton of cardio, and that's how she's been able to keep her weight off. So she's continued to do that through this sort of, menopausal period. Again, doing her sleep history, not getting great sleep. She's finding, during her feeding window, she tends to snack a lot when she's doing her feeding window. So to me, I'm like, ooh, there you go. And have you changed that? Have you needed to? And two, have you? So during her feeding window, she snacks a lot. So I'm like, ooh, is there some sleep apnea? She's not really snoring, but then also is struggling with some changes in her mood, maybe some underlying depression when we do the scale, some low-level depression when we do the screening scale. What else? I said no lifting, right? Lots of cardio, does time-restricted eating, and we talked about her sleep. So I've got a pretty good sense of her nutrition. No significant family history that I need to worry about as far as like cardiac disease or anything like that. No significant family history. Okay, so then we do some labs. I find I have to eat more, less snacking, more protein. Yes, Mika. High five. Boom, boom. I love it. So we do some labs on her. She's got a high CRP, right? She's got that high inflammatory marker. She's got insulin resistance. She has very low vitamin D, and she's got an elevated cholesterol panel. So to me, that's not surprising, right? And I want people, I wish I could help everybody, because I think if we just listen to people and just get a really good history, we can tell a lot. The labs are almost confirmatory, right? The labs sort of just say, yep, that's what we were expecting. And then the next piece is, okay, well, how do we help, right? How do we help change that trajectory? So the reason why her labs are not that sort of surprising to me, so she's doing a ton of exercise, and she's not getting great sleep, and she's got a low caloric intake. All of that will drive some insulin resistance. All of that will drive a high sensitivity CRP. Plus, she's got some sleep apnea likely. So that's also going to drive things. It's going to make her weight loss challenging. It's going to drive potentially some insulin resistance. Spending time listening, imagine. It's going to drive some insulin resistance, right? She's got some sleep apnea. And I wasn't surprised about her low vitamin D. Most of her cardio was indoors, so she's not spending a ton of time outside. And then again, her caloric intake and her nutritional intake is not sort of varied enough that I thought she was getting enough foods that would support her vitamin D, and then the conversion happens, right, in her, during sunlight. And then her elevated lipid panel. That one, again, mostly vegetarian. I would have thought maybe would have been a little bit better. But again, if we're doing a lot of processed food snacking, that'll drive kind of your triglycerides up a little bit. That can drive your lipid panel as well. So when I look at her in totality, right, the things we talked about, again, during perimenopause and menopause, cardio is not necessarily going to be our friend when it comes to our metabolism, right? Again, I'm never going to tell somebody never, ever, ever, but that can't be our only choice when it comes to exercise. Lifting becomes wildly important for muscle mass, for our metabolism, for long-term health. I mean, just if you think about, as I watch those that are 20, 30 years my senior, the simple activities of daily living, right? Carrying the groceries, being steady on our feet, bending down to pick stuff up. That stuff requires dexterity, it requires strength, it requires muscle mass, it requires a really good proprioception and balance. All of that stuff we need to be working on as we get into our 40s and 50s. Again, I had a conversation and the patient had read something somewhere about how leg strength and grip strength has a lot to do. We can base our longevity and our how high quality our life will be later in our years based on our grip strength and our leg strength. And they were saying how it's, what you do in your 40s and 50s that sort of sets your retirement. I'm like, you're singing my tune. Because that's what I tell people, right? It's like what you do now is going to define how high functioning and high quality your retirement is going to be. So if for no other reason, what do you want your retirement to look like, assuming we all get to retire? Some of it has to work for a long time, but what do you want your later years to look like? Because it's what we do now that's going to set that up for us. So she's doing lots of cardio and not doing any lifting at all. So how do we help her introduce that. If she's really apprehensive about the gym, how do we get a trainer? How do we do some weights at home, right? Can we get a home gym? Do you have the financial ability to get a few devices or a few weights at home and start doing that? Do we need to send you to PT first to make sure you've got some good functional foundational things before you do that? So for her, she felt comfortable starting to do that. She wasn't leery of the gym. She just didn't know that that's what she needed to do. Again, that's how she'd been managing her weight. Lots of cardio and time-restricted eating. So for her, understanding that she had to sort of change that up, so getting her into the gym, she was comfortable doing that. She was able to get a session or two with a personal trainer, understand how to lift, and then she was able to introduce 1 to 2 days worth of lifting into her schedule with the intent of maybe adding a little bit more. Definitely cutting back on all that cardio. Again, great for cardiovascular fitness, not so great for metabolism in this age range. So she was cutting back on her cardio. Then we went into her nutrition. So mostly vegetarian, but a very low caloric intake, and she was doing time-restricted eating. Time-restricted eating is a complicated topic. I will give you my broad brush, right? Yes, it can have some benefit. I personally don't recommend it, again, during this perimenopause and menopause, right? I think fasting, which really is time-restricted eating, intermittent fasting, time-restricted eating, same thing. That prolonged fasting, yes, there's been some research that shows that that can reverse insulin resistance. Yes, there's been some research that shows that you can lose weight with time-restricted eating. When we throw in the menopausal period and that hormone stuff, it just, you gotta just toss that all out the window. So my preference is to not do time-restricted eating. If someone really wants to do that because they think it works for them, then I really, really talk to them about what is the quality of what you're eating in that window. But I really try to encourage not to do time-restricted eating. Again, that breakfast is important. Set yourself up right. Balance your glucose early in the day. Make sure you're eating nutrient-dense foods, right? I'm telling you, exactly. That time-restricted eating, intermittent fasting is brutal when we're in perimenopause and menopause. It is brutal. So highly encourage women not to do that. And that takes a lot to change that, right? I mean, if you're used to not eating until middle of the day, now I'm telling you need to eat breakfast. Some people are like, I can't. I feel like I'm going to. So you slowly have to change our habits in order to continue to get the goals we want. So I would not recommend time-restricted eating or intermittent fasting. Get that good solid breakfast in, high quality protein, healthy fat, do a complex carb, balance your blood sugar early so that you're not on the hamster wheel. And then again, if we are just jamming out exercise and not getting enough nutrition, we are going to be toast from a metabolic standpoint, from a weight standpoint. Yes, eating, correct. So back in the day when I was doing 100% sports and I dealt with a lot of female athletes, we have this thing we used to call it female athlete triad. And now it's been redefined as RED-S, or relative energy deficiency in sport, because we recognize that it happens in men as well as women. It's just that in women, we were seeing these symptoms. Girls weren't getting their periods on time. They were having increased risk of stress fractures. And the reason was because they were burning more energy than they were taking in, right? And what was happening is as they got into their 30s, they were osteopenic, borderline osteoporotic, because they had not built the bone that they needed to, because they had relative energy deficiency, right? Burning more than you're taking in. Well, that heavy cardio and low caloric intake is essentially that same phenomenon, but now we move it into our 40s and 50s, right? So we're not going to have what we need to build. You're going to lose bone faster, right? Because we talked about that last time. We build our bone early, and then the rapid loss happens 3 to 5 years before menopause and into about 2 to 3 years of menopause. That's the fastest time of our bone loss. So the last thing we want to be doing is depleting that even further by doing this tight, narrow eating with a low caloric intake and then like a ton of cardio. So you got to flip that, right? Lift, do less cardio, feed yourself. Please feed yourself high quality foods, nutrient dense foods. So we really had to work through that between her food and her exercise. Again, complex carbohydrates, don't do a lot of processed, highly sugary things. I mentioned it during the first case, looking at things, if we're going to buy packaged things, flip it over, look at the back. Your fiber to carbohydrate ratio should be no more than 5-1. Right? Every 1 gram of fiber, no more than 5 grams of carbs. That's how you know that something is more complex carb versus refined carb. The refined carbs are going to rapidly increase your glucose. Lots of insulin gets secreted, shuttles all that glucose away, and then you do the nosedive 2 to 3 hours later, and then you're reaching, oh my God, I need to eat something, right? The people looking in the cabinets, like running around the office, like, who's got a snack? I need something to eat. I got to go get something to eat, right? You're just on that hamster wheel. So complex carbohydrates, high quality protein, healthy fat. So we spent a lot of time talking about nutrition and exercise on her because that's the biggest bang for her buck, right? Yes, she's got sleep apnea. Yes, we need to do the sleep study. Yes, we need to get her a CPAP or a dental device. But again, it's like when I listen to people, it's like, where's going to be the biggest yield? And we start there. For her, that too much cardio, not enough food was the biggest thing. So changing that relationship was going to confer the biggest amount of health benefit for her. Not to say we don't do all of the other things, but that was going to be the big thing that we could do most immediately. So that's really where we spent a lot of our time. Again, that high sensitivity CRP is going to improve as we adjust our calories and our exercise. Bring the exercise down, bring our nutrition up, not just in quantity, but the quality of it. The insulin resistance was going to improve as we did that. And then obviously as we treated the sleep apnea, those symptoms would improve. Supplemented her vitamin D. Again, high quality supplement. I give all my patients my 35% off on full script. And then over time, that lipid panel would also address once we took away some of the processed things that she was eating, mostly because she just had no gas in the tank, right? So when she was feeding, she was like, because there was just nothing in there. So once we can remove some of those processed foods and replace them with good nutrient dense, high fiber, nutrient dense whole food, I tell people shop around the perimeter of the grocery store, that lipid panel can start to improve. Holy moly, I talked for almost an hour. Okay, that's it. I have nothing else to say. Any questions? Well, hopefully this format was interesting. I did things very differently today. I sort of just did more of a case study. So hopefully this was interesting and was helpful for people to see not just how I manage it, but for yourself, right? Like think about, okay, who am I? Am I a Pam? Am I a Sarah? Or am I a Rachel? And how would you tweak your own stuff, right? You are an N of one. Like in research, in medicine, we talk about how many people are in the study to give it weight. You are your own study. You are your own case study. Change something, change one parameter at a time, do that, and then adjust. Case into 3 different, okay. See? I love you, Mika. I need somebody to do my social media. Oh my gosh. Media, so do 3 different social posts. That's right. Okay, I'll see what I can do. I love it. Well, this was fun. I like talking about it this way, so this was super fun. All right, I appreciate you guys. Have a fantastic holiday. Be safe. Enjoy your family, friends, whether they are your family as you're chosen or you're given. I can't even tell you guys, I so appreciate you taking time out of your day and spending it with me. I really do. So thank you. And I'll see you guys next week. Alrighty? No worries. All right. Take care. Bye, Mo. Love you too. Bye-bye.